I always believed that if you built something with your own hands, if you bled and sweat for it, it was yours. My name is Clementine Joy, and for 3 years, my 1920s craftsman bungalow was my sanctuary, a fortress I was rebuilding one floorboard at a time. Then the letter came. A $150,000 loan I never applied for, with an appraisal scheduled for the next day. They had my social security number, my mother's maiden name, and they were coming to take my life's work. The people who did this weren't strangers. They were my family. How do you fight a war when the enemy lives inside your heart? Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The first thing I ever bought with my own money wasn't a car. It was a 1920s craftsman bungalow on the brink of being condemned. The city had it slated for demolition, a rotting tooth, in an otherwise gentrifying smile of a neighborhood. I bought it for pennies, and in turn, it demanded my blood and sweat. I called it the sanctuary. For 3 solid years, every dollar I earned as a freelance historical consultant, every splinter I tweezed from my palms, every night I spent covered in plaster dust, was a prayer I was whispering into its old-growth pine bones. I was 28 years old, and I was finally painstakingly building something that was unequivocally mine. This wasn't a flip. I despise that word. Flipping is soulless. It's about covering up character with gray vinyl planking and cheap brushed nickel fixtures. I was restoring. I was a historian, and this house was my thesis. It was my home, my portfolio, and my fortress. It was the one place on earth I was safe from the quiet, crushing weight of my family's expectations. A family that only ever saw me as a supporting character in my older brother Liam's perpetually failing story. I could still taste the bitter ashes of last Sunday's dinner. The scene was as predictable as a rerun. Liam holding court at the head of the table, pontificating about his latest brilliant venture. "It's not just a craft brewery app, Dad," he'd said, gesturing with a fork. "It's a curated logistical ecosystem for micro-distilleries. It's the future." My father Arthur just nodded, his focus entirely on carving the roast, a man who had mistaken passivity for peace his entire life. My mother Meredith, however, was beaming, her wine glass held aloft like a trophy. "An entrepreneur just needs capital to fly, Clementine," she'd said, her eyes finding mine. The smile never touched them. "It's a shame all your money is tied up in that drafty old house." I'd felt the familiar hot sting, the sensible small one. That was me. Clementine, the quiet historian with her sensible, small, drafty life, while Liam, the golden child, was destined to fly. He'd been failing upwards for a decade, leaving a trail of busted startups and quiet loans from our parents in his wake, but he was still the one they bet on. I just paid my own bills, which in their eyes was a hobby, not an achievement. The afternoon sun of early October was warm on my face. As I sat on the porch swing, I'd rebuilt myself. The chain let out a soft, rhythmic creak-creak that set the tempo for my thoughts. In my lap was a sketch pad, my pencil flying, as I worked out the joinery for the restored gable finial. My hands, calloused and stained with wood varnish, were the only proof I needed. I'd spent the last month sourcing antique glass doorknobs, the heavy octagonal kind that scatter light like diamonds. I'd found them at an estate sale in Waco. Last weekend, I'd finished the kitchen backsplash using original subway tile I'd salvaged from a demolished apothecary. I'd spent 40 hours on my hands and knees scrubbing a century of grime off each individual tile with a toothbrush. This house wasn't just property, it was my life's work. Every joist, every window, every polished floorboard was a piece of my own soul I was reclaiming. The familiar thwack of the mail slot echoed from the front hall. I padded inside, my bare feet cool on the hardwood I'd hand-planed for 6 weeks. I sifted through the stack on the floor. Junk mail for the previous owner. A catalog from a restoration hardware company. A bill. And then I saw it. Tucked between a pizza flyer and an electric bill was a thick, crisp 9x12 envelope. It was heavy, made of expensive cream-colored cardstock. In the top left corner was the embossed logo of a major national bank. A bank I had never, ever done business with. A cold, strange feeling like drinking ice water too fast bloomed in my chest. This wasn't junk. I carried it back out to the porch, the swing groaning as I sat. My hands, which were so steady with a chisel, fumbled with the seal. I ripped it open, pulling out a sheaf of equally expensive-feeling papers. A cover letter filled with corporate babble. Dear Ms. Joy, we are pleased to move forward. I scanned the page, my eyes catching on bolded text. My stomach dropped. Final notice of appraisal. Below it, a dollar amount that made me physically recoil. $150,000. Home equity line of credit. My heart wasn't beating. It was just a cold, hard lump in my chest. I read the words again, sure I was misunderstanding. Our appraiser, Mr. Fields, is scheduled for your property visit tomorrow, October 14th at 10 a.m. We look forward to your signature on the final loan agreement you applied for. My sketch pad slid from my lap, clattering onto the porch boards. The pencil rolled a tiny scratching sound in the sudden deafening silence. Tomorrow. They were coming tomorrow. I stared at the words, my blood turning to ice. I never applied for any loan. Mistake! The word came out as a ragged whisper. That was the only thing my brain could form. It had to be a mistake. A clerical error. They meant another Clementine Joy. My fingers were numb, fumbling with my phone, the expensive cream-colored paper crackling in my grip. I dropped the phone twice on the porch boards before I could pull up the bank's number from the letterhead. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely press the numbers correctly. The automated menu was a cheerful, tinny nightmare of prompts. Press 1 for account services. Press 2 for new loans. I finally just mashed 0 until a human voice, startlingly pleasant, broke through. Thank you for calling National Mutual Bank. This is Brenda. How can I help you? I had to swallow twice to make my voice work. Hi, I stammered. My name is Clementine Joy. I received a letter, a final notice of appraisal. It's for a loan I never applied for. It must be a mistake. You must have the wrong person. I heard the polite, rapid clack-clack of typing. One moment, Ms. Joy. Yes, I have your file right here. Her voice was still painfully upbeat. The $150,000 home equity line of credit. Yes, looks like we're just waiting on that appraisal tomorrow and your final signature to release the funds. Congratulations. The cheerfulness was a physical blow. No, I said, my voice cracking. No, you don't understand. I never applied for this. I never spoke to your bank. I never wanted this. A pause on the line. The polite typing stopped. Brenda's tone shifted, becoming formal, laced with a sudden cold suspicion. Ma'am, she said, I'm looking at the digital application right here. We have your social security number, your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, all verified. The pre-approval was based on your excellent credit history. My mother's maiden name. The world didn't just tilt. It fell off its axis. The porch swing, the sunny street, the October air, it all dissolved. The sound in my ears wasn't my own heartbeat. It was the sharp, specific scratch-scratch of a ballpoint pen on a yellow legal pad. It was 2014. I was 18, sitting at my parents' polished oak kitchen table, drowning in FAFSA forms for college. I was crying, totally overwhelmed by the bureaucracy, terrified I'd get it wrong and lose my scholarships. My mother, Meredith, had swooped in, her lavender and sandalwood perfume settling over me like a comforting cloud. Oh, darling, this is so complicated. You'll get it all wrong. She'd smiled, a practiced, reassuring smile that calmed me instantly. Just let me handle the sensitive parts. What's your social security number again? I'd recited it, grateful, my voice thick with tears. I watched her write it down on the pad in her quick, precise script. Then she'd ripped off the page and tucked it neatly into a thick 3-ring binder, the one with the gold embossed label on the spine, Family Finances. I'll keep a copy, she'd smiled, patting my hand, just in case of emergencies. Ms. Joy, are you still there? Brenda's voice snapped me back to the present. Yes, I said. My voice was a stranger's, flat and dead. Thank you. You've been very helpful. I hung up. The shaking in my hands had stopped. It was replaced by a terrifying cold stillness. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed Mom. It rang twice and she picked up. Clementine, what a surprise, darling, I was just thinking about you. Her voice was breezy light like sunshine and expensive lotion. Mom, I said. No hi, no preamble. You applied for a $150,000 loan in my name. The line went utterly silent. I heard her take a sharp, annoyed breath, the exact sound she used to make when I'd spilled something on her white carpet as a child. Then the warmth in her voice vanished, stripped away, leaving only cold, hard steel. Don't be so dramatic, Clementine. It's not your money. It's the house's money. You're just the custodian. I gripped the porch railing, my knuckles white. What are you talking about? I whispered. Liam, she said, as if that one word explained everything, as if I were the stupidest person in the world. His business plan is brilliant, but the investors need to see him liquid. You're just sitting on that equity, Clementine, hoarding it. It's selfish, frankly. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they'd been packed with cement. Hoarding, Mom, I live here. I'm restoring it. You used my name. You stole my identity. That's a crime. I heard her scoff, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It's a family matter, Clementine. A formality. We always knew that house was an investment, it was never your home. It's time for it to pay out. The appraiser is coming tomorrow at 10. Be there, sign the papers, and don't make this difficult. Liam is your brother. Before I could find a word, before I could find the air in my lungs to scream, the line clicked dead. She had hung up on me. The click echoed in the quiet of the porch. It was the sound of a lock engaging, of a cell door slamming shut. They weren't asking. They were telling. They had already done it, and I was just the final messy detail to be managed. The appraiser. The signature. A formality. I looked at my antique front door, the one I'd spent a week restoring, the one they expected me to open. This wasn't a request. This was a home invasion. My hand, now steady as a surgeon's, picked up the phone. I dialed the bank's number again. I bypassed the pleasantries. I need to be connected to your identity theft and fraud department. I said, my voice low and cold. Right now. Sleep was impossible. The adrenaline from my mother's call lit my veins with a cold chemical fire. I spent the entire night in the harsh blue light of my laptop screen, my restored Victorian armchair pulled up to the dining room table. I was no longer Clem. I was Ms. Joy, a woman with a case number. I was on the phone for a total of 6 hours, passed between automated systems and patient serious-sounding fraud specialists. I methodically explained my situation over and over, my voice becoming flatter and more precise each time. With a woman named Sharon from the fraud department, I canceled the loan application. We will flag this as confirmed identity theft. Family member, Ms. Joy. She'd said, her voice full of practiced empathy. We've locked the application permanently. Next, I went to the websites for all 3 credit bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, and one by one, I froze my credit. I built a digital wall around my name, a fortress of passwords and security questions. The final call at 3 in the morning was to the Federal Trade Commission's identity theft hotline. I filed an official report answering questions that made my stomach churn. Yes, the person I suspect is my mother, Meredith Joy. The agent at the other end was quiet for a moment. I'm very sorry to hear that, ma'am. You need to understand you've just filed a report for a federal felony. The word felony hung in the air long after I'd hung up. It was a cold, hard, heavy word. It was the end of something. I must have dozed off in the chair because I woke with a jolt, my neck aching to the sound of a bird chirping. Sunlight was streaming through the windows. My phone screen read 9:52 a.m., 10 o'clock, the time the appraiser was supposed to come, the time they thought he was coming. I was rigid with exhaustion, my body humming with a toxic mix of caffeine and dread. I went to the kitchen and gripped my favorite mug, the one I'd bought at a local pottery fair, but the coffee I'd made hours ago was cold. I drank it anyway, the bitter, sludgy taste a fitting match for the one in my mouth. I sat on the bottom step of my staircase, the one I'd stripped and stained by hand, and I waited. At 10:03 a.m., a vehicle door slammed. I moved to the front window, peering through the gap in the antique lace curtains. It wasn't the appraiser. It was a white, late-model SUV, the kind that cost more than my first 2 years of restoration supplies. My mother's car. The doors opened, and they filed out like a small, angry delegation. My mother Meredith in pressed linen trousers. My father Arthur, his shoulders slumped, looking everywhere but at my house. And Liam, my brother, pasty, and looking annoyed like this was all a massive inconvenience that was keeping him from his important work. They marched up my newly laid brick walkway. Liam, leading the charge, didn't knock. He just grabbed the antique doorknob and tried to turn it. When he found it locked, he banged on the door. Not a knock. It was a full-fisted, entitled, rhythmic bang, bang, bang. "Clem, open up, the appraiser's supposed to be here, stop messing around." His voice was muffled but laced with that familiar spoiled impatience. I didn't move. I just watched him. Then a movement across the street caught my eye. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, the retired Vietnam vet from the corner house, stepped out onto his porch. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, and watched. He was a quiet man. We'd only ever nodded, but I knew he respected the work I was doing on the house. That small, silent act of witness sent a rod of steel straight up my spine. I walked to the door. I took a deep breath. I slid the heavy-duty chain lock I'd installed last night into its groove. Then I turned the deadbolt and opened the door exactly 4 inches. My mother's face was right there, a mask of controlled white-hot rage. Her perfectly applied lipstick was a grotesque slash. "Clementine Joy," she hissed, "you open this door right now." Liam shouldered his way forward. "Where's the appraiser, Clem? What did you do?" And before I could answer, my mother's eyes widened in realization. "You canceled it," she whispered, her voice venomous. "You actually canceled it. Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused?" I looked past her at my father, who was pointedly studying the mums in my flower bed. "This is my house," I said. I was shocked my voice didn't shake. It was clear and cold. "You are not welcome here. You used my name to commit a crime." Liam let out a grunt of pure frustration. "Clem, stop being such a bitch. Just sign the damn papers." He lunged, shoving his shoulder hard against the door. The wood groaned and the chain snapped taut, rattling in its metal track, the frame shaking. It was the single most violent sound I'd ever heard. I stumbled back a step, and in that instant, all my fear, all my exhaustion vanished. It was replaced by something else. Something clean and hard like a diamond. I raised my phone, my thumb already on the screen. The small red record light glowed. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice suddenly loud, projecting across the lawn for Mr. Henderson to hear. "And you just assaulted me. Get off my property before I call the police." Liam froze, his hand still on the door. My father finally looked up, his face pale. My mother's eyes narrowed into slits. The smile she gave me was the scariest thing I had ever seen. "You'll regret this," she whispered, the words a promise. "You just declared war on your own family." The silence that followed their retreat was heavy, absolute, and short-lived. I was still leaning against the front door, my back pressed to the wood, the phone clutched in my hand with the saved recording. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a sick, shaky hollowness in my stomach. It lasted exactly 2 hours. My phone buzzed on the hall table, the sound so violent in the quiet it made me jump. It was my father. "Arthur." A text. I stared at the lock screen preview, the words swimming in front of my eyes. "Clementine, your mother is devastated. You've humiliated her. You need to apologize and fix this. Fix this." Not she needed to fix what she had done. I needed to apologize for the humiliation she was feeling. The audacity of it was a slap. I didn't reply. My thumb hovered over the block button. Before I could press it, another text came in. "An aunt, my mother's sister, heard what you did to Liam. How could you be so selfish? He's your brother." Another. "A cousin I hadn't seen in 2 years. Your mother is in tears. You should be ashamed. It was a digital avalanche, a coordinated assault. In less than a day, I wasn't just the daughter who had said no. I was the monster who had attacked the family. I had been excommunicated via group text. The personal part of the war was over. I had already lost. But the war itself was just beginning. The real war, the one designed not just to punish me, but to cripple me, started the next morning. I woke up on my sofa, a feeling of pure cold dread in my gut, my phone still clutched in my hand. An email notification from Google had come in overnight. You have a new review for Clementine Joy Historical Consulting. My business. My name. The one I had built from nothing that ran on pristine 5-star reviews and ecstatic word-of-mouth referrals. I opened it. 1 star. The name was Mark P. I had never had a client named Mark. The review was a block of cold, calculated text. Unreliable and unstable. Hired Clementine Joy for a consult. She never showed up, kept the deposit. Avoid at all costs. My blood ran cold. Kept the deposit. I didn't even take deposits for initial consultations. It was a perfect lie crafted to hit every one of my professional pressure points. I was still trying to figure out how to report it when another alert came in. Yelp. 1 star. This time the name was Jenna S. Mentally erratic. Seemed promising at first, but became hostile and unprofessional. Had to terminate the contract. The words. Unstable, erratic, hostile. These weren't the words of a disappointed client. This was a character assassination. This was Meredith. This was her voice, her precise, cutting vocabulary. Then came the final, brutal stroke. A friend from college who still lived in town sent me a screenshot with a single message. Clem, what is this? It was a public post in the town's community Facebook group. Warning to all homeowners in the area. It began posted by an anonymous account, a concerned neighbor. Do not hire Clementine Joy Historical Consulting. She is a fraud and a thief. She took money from my family and refuses to do the work or return our calls. The comments section was a horror show. Oh my God, I was just about to call her for my kitchen. Thanks for the warning. This is awful. Someone should report her to the state board. They weren't just trying to steal my house. They were trying to destroy my livelihood. They were methodically, strategically trying to erase me. The poison worked with terrifying speed. My phone, which usually buzzed 3 or 4 times a day with inquiries, went silent. A client I was set to sign with a big, exciting restoration on the historical Main Street sent a curt email that afternoon. So sorry, Clementine, but we've decided to go in a different direction. We need someone more established. The subtext was a foghorn. Someone who isn't a mentally erratic thief. I was suffocating. They had cut me off from my family and were now with chilling efficiency cutting me off from my life. I was alone, trapped in my beautiful, perfect house, which was rapidly starting to feel like a very expensive tomb. I sat on the floor of my workshop surrounded by reclaimed lumber and antique tools, and for the first time I couldn't breathe. I scrolled through my contacts past aunt, blocked past cousin, blocked past dad, muted. I stopped on a name I hadn't dialed in over a decade. Aunt Celeste, my father's estranged sister. The family black sheep. The one who'd had a spectacular door-slamming, wine-throwing fight with Meredith 15 years ago and had never come back for Thanksgiving. The one they all whispered about as difficult. I pressed the button. She picked up on the second ring. Well, hell must have frozen over. Her voice was smoky sharp and exactly as I remembered. My voice broke. The whole sordid story just poured out of me. The loan, the FAFSA form, the door, the assault, the reviews. I just unraveled. Celeste listened to the entire sobbing, incoherent story without a single interruption. When I was done, gasping for air, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. Honey, she finally said, her voice grim. Welcome to the club. I sniffed. What club? The Meredith tried to destroy my life club. You need to understand something, Clem. Your mother doesn't just get mad, she destroys. This isn't a family squabble. This is asymmetric warfare. She will not stop until you are in ruins. You can't make nice. You can't talk it out. And you sure as hell can't win this on your own. What? What do I do? I whispered. You get a shark, Celeste said, her voice suddenly sharp all business. You need a lawyer, not some sleepy family practice guy who wants everyone to find common ground. A shark. I told her I couldn't afford a shark. The reviews were already killing my income. I know a guy, she cut me off. His name is Ben Carter. He's young, but I've heard he's a bare-knuckle brawler in a three-piece suit. He specializes in civil fraud and defamation. He hates bullies. Call him. Today. We hung up. The tears were gone. The fear, the paranoia, the crushing isolation. It was all still there, but it was crystallizing. It was hardening into something else. Something cold, sharp, and heavy. My mother had declared war. Aunt Celeste was right. This wasn't a family dispute. This was warfare. War. I thought my hand already dialing Ben Carter's number. Okay, let's have a war. Ben Carter's office was the antithesis of my life. Mine was filled with sawdust, old wood, and the smell of varnish. His was all glass-brushed steel and the quiet, expensive hum of filtered air. It was on the 12th floor of a downtown high-rise, a view of the city I rarely saw. Ben himself was just as Aunt Celeste had described, mid-30s, in a perfectly tailored gray suit, with a stillness about him that was almost unnerving. He didn't fidget. He didn't offer fake sympathies. He just sat, his hands steepled, and listened. I had brought my laptop and a single overflowing accordion file. I laid it all out. The HELOC letter. The printout of the bank's official fraud report. The audio file of Liam slamming against my door. The screenshots of the reviews, the community Facebook post, and the email from the client who had canceled. I spoke for 20 minutes, my voice low and steady, presenting the facts as if I were detailing the structural flaws of a 19th century foundation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. This is astounding, he said, his voice flat. It's a textbook case. We have identity theft, attempted fraud, clear-cut defamation, and what's called tortious interference with your business contracts. He leaned forward, and for the first time I saw the shark. But here's the problem, Clementine. It's family. A district attorney will look at this, see mother versus daughter, and hesitate. They'll call it a civil matter and push it off their desk. A he said, she said civil suit is a bloodbath. It'll bleed you dry, and your mother knows that. She's counting on you not having the stomach or the money to fight. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. We can't just have a case. We need a fortress. We need evidence so absolute, so overwhelming, that they don't get a chance to fight. We need them to have no other option but total, unconditional surrender. He turned back to me, and I felt that spark of cold resolve I'd felt on the porch. He was right. This wasn't a job for a sledgehammer. This was a job for a scalpel. I was a historical consultant. Research, documentation, and building an ironclad case was my job. Okay, I said, meeting his gaze. Let's build a fortress. The next 3 weeks were a blur of methodical, focused work. I wasn't a victim. I was the lead investigator on the most important project of my life. I channeled all the grief and rage into my old familiar system, binders, tabs, and cross-references. First, the paper trail. I went to my safe deposit box and pulled the original notarized deed to the sanctuary. My name and my name alone was on it. I then went back 8 years and printed every single mortgage statement, every property tax payment, every utility bill, all paid from my sole bank account. Then I went to my workshop and pulled the binders, the other binders, the ones detailing the restoration. I had every receipt, the $12,000 for the new roof, the $4,500 for the period-correct windows, the $800 for the salvaged antique doorknobs. 3 years of my life documented down to the last box of screws, all paid by Clementine Joy Historical Consulting. While I built the financial case, Ben's office drafted a formal affidavit. I brought it over to Mr. Henderson along with a box of homemade cookies. He met me on his porch, the same one he'd stood on during the siege. He read the document which detailed Liam's assault and Meredith's threats, his face grim. "They're vultures, Ms. Joy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I saw cowards like that in the service, all bravado until someone stands up to them." He signed his name with a firm, steady hand. Another brick in the wall. The digital trail was Ben's domain. His office subpoenaed the IP information for the fake reviews. The results were just as we expected, sloppy, arrogant. Mark P. and Jenna S. were posted from the public library, the one 3 blocks from my parents' house. The concerned neighbor post in the community forum, however, was routed through a VPN service. That was Meredith trying to be clever. But the true smoking gun wasn't digital. It was paper. It was buried in a box in my attic labeled college. I was looking for my old student loan documents when I found it. A folded, worn copy of my 2014 FAFSA application. The one my mother had helped me with. My hands shook as I carried it downstairs. I laid it on my drafting table. Then I pulled out the faxed copy of the HELOC application the bank had sent me. I put them side by side under the bright, clear light of my architect's lamp, and I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't just a similar signature. It was identical. A perfect, practiced forgery. My mother hadn't just tried to sign my name. She had practiced. She had held on to my signature, that FAFSA form, for 10 years, just in case of emergencies. This was the emergency. I brought the 2 documents to Ben's office. He placed them under a magnifying glass, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "You've done half my job for me, Clementine," he said, and there was a note of genuine awe in his voice. "You're meticulous." It was the highest compliment I'd ever received. It was a word that in my family had always meant fussy or difficult. Here in this office it meant powerful. A quiet, powerful respect had formed between us, the kind built on competence. We were ready. Ben was drafting the initial lawsuit when his assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Carter," her voice was hesitant, "a courier just dropped this. It's for Ms. Joy, but from the law firm of Abbott, Price and Hayes." Ben frowned. "That's your parents' firm." He took the thick envelope from her, slid it open with a letter opener, and scanned the first page. His eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. He handed it to me. It was a cease and desist letter. It wasn't from us. It was to us. "They're accusing you," he said, his voice hardening, "of harassment, slander, and financial elder abuse for withholding family assets. They're threatening to countersue if you don't immediately unfreeze your credit and approve the loan." I stared at the paper, at the lies, at the sheer, breathtaking audacity. They hadn't just declared war. They were trying to frame me as the one who'd launched the first attack. Ben laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a sharp, dry bark of disbelief that startled me. He tossed the cease and desist letter onto his glass desk as if it were a piece of trash. "It's a bluff," he said, and the shark-like smile was back, all teeth. "A desperate, sloppy, arrogant bluff. They're trying to scare you into submission. They're accusing you of the very things they're doing. It's a classic case of Darvo deny attack in reverse, victim and offender." He leaned forward, all the casual energy gone from his posture. "We can file our suit today. It'll be public record by 5 o'clock. Or, we can do this one other way. We call an intervention, a formal mediation. We get them and their high-priced lawyer right here in this conference room." He gestured to the room we were in. "We show them our hand. We show them the fortress you built. We give them exactly one chance to fold before we burn their whole world down." My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. A lawsuit felt clean distant. This was personal. It was terrifying. And I realized in that second, it was exactly what I needed. "I want to do that," I said, my voice quiet but steely. "I want to see their faces. I want my father to see it." Ben nodded, his eyes cold and satisfied. "Good. I'll make the call." 2 days later, I was sitting at that long, polished mahogany table, the same spot where I'd first met Ben. The air in the room was cold, sterile, and silent. Ben was beside me, a single slim file in front of him. Nothing else. The door opened. They entered. Meredith, Arthur, and Liam flanked by their lawyer, a man in his 60s with a silver mane and a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He oozed establishment power. They sat opposite us, a united, smug front. Meredith gave me a look of pure, icy disappointment, the one she had perfected over 28 years to make me feel small. Liam wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the water pitcher in the center of the table. My father just looked tired, defeated before we had even begun. Their lawyer, Mr. Hayes, cleared his throat and adjusted his immaculate cuffs. "My clients," he began, his voice a rich, condescending baritone, "are prepared to be generous given the emotional nature of this family dispute. They will of course drop their pending suit for harassment and financial elder abuse if Ms. Joy simply agrees to—" Ben held up a hand. The gesture was so sharp, so sudden, it cut the lawyer off mid-sentence. "We're not here to negotiate, Mr. Hayes." Ben's voice was flat, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We're here to present our findings." I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady. From a banker's box at my feet, I lifted 3 identical 4-inch thick black binders. I walked the length of the table with measured steps. I placed the first one in front of Meredith and Arthur. I placed the second one in front of Liam, and I slid the third one across the polished wood to their lawyer. "This," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden dead silence of the room, "is my response." Meredith scoffed. "Binders? How very you, Clementine! What's this, your receipts for paint?" Liam actually rolled his eyes, but Mr. Hayes, the lawyer, opened his. His practiced, confident expression didn't just falter, it collapsed. His face went a sickly, chalky white. He flipped a page, his eyes scanning, then another. He looked up not at me or Ben, but at Meredith, his eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. He knew. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "What is it?" Meredith snapped, her patience gone. She ripped hers open. "Tab A," Ben said, his voice a lethal monotone, "is the fraudulent home equity line of credit application filed on October 12th. Meredith's face tightened. "Tab B," he continued, "is the official bank fraud report flagging your cell phone number, Meredith, as the point of contact for the fraudulent application. Tab C," I cut in, my own voice ringing out clear and strong, "is the 2014 FAFSA form you helped me with laid side by side with the HELOC application. As you can see, the forgery is perfect. You must have practiced." My father, who had been staring at the table, finally looked up. His hands were shaking. He reached for the binder and fumbled, flipping to tab C. He stared at the 2 signatures. "Meredith," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Tab D." Ben's voice was relentless, a hammer striking steel. "Is the notarized affidavit from your neighbor, Mr. Henderson, detailing the events of October 14th, including Mr. Liam Joy's physical assault on Ms. Joy's front door?" Liam sank lower in his chair, his face flushing crimson. "Tab E, the IP logs tracing the defamatory reviews to the public library nearest your home and the timestamps that correlate perfectly with your known schedule, Meredith." "And then," Ben said, a note of finality in his voice, "there's tab F, the final blow." Mr. Hayes was already there, his face ashen. "This," Ben said, "is a forensic accounting report on Mr. Liam Joy's startup. It appears, Mr. and Mrs. Joy, that your son isn't just a bad businessman. He's $80,000 in debt to, let's see, 2 online casinos and a private lender in another state. The $150,000 wasn't for investors, it was to cover his gambling debts." The room was a vacuum. Liam looked like he was going to be sick, his skin a pale greenish gray. Mr. Hayes slowly, deliberately closed his binder and looked at his clients. "Did you," he asked Meredith, his voice a low, strangled rasp, "forge your daughter's signature on a federal loan application?" My father just stared at the page, his face a mask of broken disbelief. "Meredith," he whispered again, "you forged her name." And that was the moment. The dam didn't just break, It exploded. Meredith's perfectly composed face contorted into a mask of pure reptilian rage. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She screamed. She slammed her hand flat on the table, making the heavy binders jump. "She owed us!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me, her whole body trembling. She owed Liam. After everything we gave her, she had all this house, this equity, and she was hoarding it, sitting on it like a dragon on a pile of gold, while her brother was drowning. She's selfish. She was always selfish. She never understood what family means. The confession, raw and venomous, hung in the air, echoing off the glass walls. Their lawyer, Mr. Hayes, just put his face in his hands. He was done. My father looked like he'd been shot. Ben let the echo of the scream fade for one long, terrible second. Then he slid a new slim document across the table. "You have two options," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a gavel. "Option A. You sign this settlement. It includes a full public retraction of every review payment in full for all of Clementine's legal fees, and a certified check for all documented business losses. It also includes a permanent binding no-contact order. You will never speak to her or about her again." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Option B. I take these 3 binders, which now include a verbal confession to felony fraud, across the street to the district attorney's office. You have 10 minutes to decide, Mr. Hayes didn't need 10 minutes. His composure, the expensive silver-maned confidence, had evaporated. He looked at his clients with a kind of cold, exhausted disgust. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly on the polished floor. "We need the hall," he said, his voice a low growl. It wasn't a request. He didn't wait for a reply, just grabbed his leather briefcase and jerked his head at the heavy glass door. The procession out was a world away from their arrogant entrance. Mr. Hayes led, his back rigid. Meredith followed, her face a mask of pure reptilian hatred, her eyes locked on me. Liam stumbled after her, his face pale and slick with sweat. My father was the last, a ghost in a good suit, his eyes fixed on the carpet. The door thudded shut, leaving Ben and me in the cold, sterile silence. It didn't last. The soundproofing in the high-rise was good, but it wasn't built for this. A low, guttural rumble came first, Mr. Hayes undoubtedly. It was immediately followed by a sound I will never forget, a high-pitched, piercing shriek of pure, unadulterated rage. It wasn't even a word, just a raw, animalistic sound. Meredith. Then a different sound, a wet, gulping, panicked sobbing. Liam. Underpinning it all was the low, defeated monotone of my father's voice, trying and failing to be heard. It was the sound of an entire false reality imploding. It felt like an eternity. The clock on the wall said it was 15 minutes. The door opened. They filed back in. The change was absolute. Liam was puffy, red-eyed, and snot-nosed, staring at his own shoes like a child. My father looked like a hollowed-out log, his eyes vacant. Meredith was pale, her jaw locked so tight I thought her teeth might crack, 2 bright, angry red spots burning high on her cheeks. They sat. Mr. Hayes, looking like he'd aged 10 years, pulled the settlement agreement toward him. He uncapped his pen. "My clients," he said, his voice a dead monotone, "are prepared to sign." He initialed the first page and slid it to Meredith. She snatched the pen and signed her name with a vicious, angry slash. It slid to my father, whose hand was shaking so badly he could barely form the letters. Liam signed last, his signature a wet, childish, illegible scrawl. They signed every page. They signed the financial restitution. They signed the public retractions. They signed the permanent binding no-contact order. Not one of them looked at me. Ben stacked the documents into a neat final pile. "We'll have a courier deliver your copies, Mr. Hayes," he said. It was a dismissal. They stood, a broken, shuffling parody of the power group that had walked in. I watched them go, my father's slumped shoulders the last thing I saw before the door clicked shut. It was over. Ben looked at me, a small, tired smile touching the corner of his mouth. "You did it, Clementine," he said, his voice soft. "You won." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I stood up, but my legs felt like they were made of wet cement. Ben held the door open for me. We walked out of the conference room, through the reception area, and into the bright light of the elevator lobby. The ding of the elevator arriving sounded like a gunshot. We stepped in. The polished steel doors closed, and I caught my reflection. I looked pale, exhausted, and utterly empty. The doors opened on the ground floor, and we walked out into the bright, loud chaos of the afternoon. The noise of the street, a bus hissing, people laughing, hit me like a physical blow. I took 2 steps onto the pavement, and the world just stopped. The relief, the tension, the rage, the grief of the last month, the last decade, all came rushing up at once. My knees gave out. I had to brace myself against the cold granite wall of the building, my shoulder pressed hard into the stone to hold me up. It wasn't a cry. It was a single ragged, tearing sob that ripped its way out of my chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. It was over. Ben was just there. He didn't touch me, didn't offer a platitude. He just stood a foot away, a silent, solid presence, shielding me from the pedestrians flowing past until the waves subsided. "I'll walk you to your car," was all he said. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember parking in my driveway and walking up the brick path to my beautiful, perfect, restored front door. I unlocked it. I stepped inside the sanctuary. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful, productive silence of my work. It was an empty silence. It was a void. I had won. I had saved my house. But I had lost my entire family. The grief that hit me then was staggering, a cold, crushing weight that was so much heavier than the anger. I was mourning. Not them, not the people who had just signed those papers. I was mourning the idea of them. I was mourning the mother, father, and brother I had spent my entire life trying to earn the love of. I was grieving a family that I finally had to admit had never really existed at all. I don't know how long I sat on the stairs. Hours. The sun had set when a soft knock came at the door. I almost didn't answer. I dragged myself up, my joints aching, and peered through the peephole. It was Ben. He wasn't in his suit. He was in jeans, holding 2 pizza boxes and a 6-pack of beer. He didn't bring champagne. He brought pizza. I opened the door, and a wave of gratitude so strong it almost made me dizzy washed over me. "I figured you wouldn't have eaten," he said, his smile small and kind. We sat on my dusty porch swing, the pizza boxes balanced between us, the beer bottles cool in our hands. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the creak of the swing the only sound. "It's okay to be sad, you know," he said quietly, not looking at me but at the street. "You didn't just win a lawsuit today, you finalized a divorce, a really messy one." He turned to look at me, his gaze clear and direct in the dim porch light. "You chose yourself, Clementine. That's a hard, painful, necessary thing to do, and you did it. You chose yourself." The words settled in my chest. It was the absolute truth. This was the start of a new, healthy relationship built on respect, sitting right next to me on a porch swing. The retraction drafted by Ben appeared in the community Facebook group 2 days later. It was weak, watery, and reeked of legalese. An unfortunate and private family dispute led to a series of misunderstandings. The reviews posted against Ms. Joy's business were inaccurate. It was pathetic, but it was public. I posted a single comment below it: "I stand by my work and my reputation. I'm grateful this matter is resolved." I turned off my notifications. But the likes started. The very first one was from Mr. Henderson. He'd even replied, "A finer craftswoman you'll never find in this state." A few old clients liked my comment. Then they liked his. It was a tiny, fragile sprout pushing up through scorched earth. It was a start. A week later, I was in my workshop sketching, trying to find my rhythm again, when my laptop pinged. An email. The subject line made my heart stop. City Preservation Board, RFP. I opened it. Dear Ms. Joy, we saw the retraction in the community forum and were frankly incredibly impressed by your professionalism under pressure. We are bidding out the full restoration of the old public library's main hall. We would like to formally invite you to submit a proposal. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I'd sat in that conference room and watched my family's world implode. Now I was 20 feet up, balanced on a rolling scaffold, the smell of old paper, lemon oil, and sawdust filling my lungs. The old public library's main hall was a glorious, cavernous space of vaulted ceilings, intricate plasterwork, and marble floors, and it was my project. Winning the city contract hadn't just saved my business, it had transformed it. It was a public, resounding, high-profile vote of confidence. It had made me, as Ben had put it, untouchable. The fake reviews the community forum post, they were all still there, a digital scar, but they had lost their power. They were just the angry, impotent graffiti of a failed regime. My reputation was no longer just skilled. The whispers in the state preservation community, the ones that led to new, bigger contracts, used different words, now resilient, integral, unflappable. I had accrued 3 apprentices who were as passionate about historical accuracy as I was. Below me, I could hear the steady, rhythmic shh of them sanding the wainscoting. The sound of their work was a quiet, comforting hum. The massive oak doors at the end of the hall creaked open, and the bright, sharp smell of fresh coffee cut through the dusty air. "Coffee's here," a voice boomed, echoing up to the ceiling. Mr. Henderson, every Friday without fail, he walked over from his house with a cardboard tray of coffee for me and my crew. He'd become a sort of unofficial mascot for the project, a guardian in a flannel shirt. "Thanks, Mr. H." I called down, not looking away from my work. "Leave mine on the table. I'm at a critical point." I was a boss now. The words still felt strange in my head, but the reality of it, the quiet confidence and decisiveness, felt like a coat I'd finally grown into. I wasn't the girl who sat on the stairs waiting, braced for the next attack. I was the woman on the scaffold, meticulously and confidently rebuilding a piece of the city's history. My life, too, had been rebuilt. The old toxic foundation had been ripped out and something new, something solid had been built in its place. Ben was a huge part of that. Our relationship, which had started in the sterile chill of his office over a shared sense of outrage, had warmed into something real, something built on a foundation of mutual respect, late-night project sketches, and take-out pizza on my porch swing. He saw my obsessive meticulousness as a superpower, not a flaw. I was, for the first time in my entire adult life, truly, deeply happy. I had a chosen community, a family I had built myself, one based on shared values and strong coffee, not on toxic obligation and blood. I turned back to the work. The magnificent arched stained glass window that dominated the main staircase. It was the library's crown jewel, and it had been my primary focus for a month. Today, I was fitting the final central piece. It wasn't just any piece. It was a triangular, wedge-shaped piece of deep amber glass at the very apex of the pointed arch. It was the keystone, the one piece that, when set, locked all the other intricate, fragile pieces of glass and lead into place. Without it, the entire structure was vulnerable to time and gravity. With it, all the weight was distributed, and the arch became self-sustaining, strong and whole. My hands, calloused and steady, picked up the piece. I had carefully wrapped its edges in new lead came. I lifted it, my movement slow, precise, and certain. I angled it into the gap, feeling the lead slide against the groove. And then, thunk! It slipped into place with a soft, solid, satisfying finality. A perfect fit. As if on cue, the afternoon sun, which had been hiding behind a cloud, broke free. It streamed through the window, through the amber keystone I had just set. The entire massive room was instantly flooded with brilliant colored light. Reds and blues and golds danced across the marble floor, painting the dust motes in the air like floating jewels. It was a perfect cinematic, breathtaking moment. The arch was complete. I was whole. That evening I got home to the sanctuary. I was tired, the good kind of tired that settles deep in your bones after a day of hard, meaningful work. I pulled the mail from the slot. Bills, a restoration catalog, and a single thin white envelope. No return address. But I knew that shaky, spidery handwriting. My father's. My heart gave a single strange lurch, an echo of the old anxiety, the old dread. But it was distant now. A ghost. I sat on my porch swing, the one Ben and I had shared, and opened it. It was a single page torn from a legal pad. "Clementine," it began. "I am in therapy. Your mother and I are separated. She is not well. She has not been for a long time. Liam is in a long-term residential treatment program in Arizona for his gambling. I know sorry will never be enough. It's a coward's word, and I was a coward. I sat by. I watched your mother and your brother try to destroy you, and I let it happen. I have no excuses, only a shame so deep I can barely write this. I just wanted you to know that I see it all now. I see what you were, and what they were, and what I was. I am so sorry for what I let happen. I hope one day you find peace." I read the letter twice. 6 months ago, it would have wrecked me. It would have ripped open the wound. It might have made me cry. It might have made me rage. Now I just felt a distant, faint echo of sadness. A twinge of pity for a broken, weak man who had finally seen the truth. But the sharp, hot anger was gone. The crushing grief was gone. They had no more power over me. I didn't cry. I didn't rip the letter to shreds and scatter it in the wind. It was just a piece of paper. A final report from a war that was long over. I folded it neatly along its original creases and went inside. I opened the bottom drawer of my antique drafting desk, the one filled with old warranties and paid-off invoices. I placed the letter inside. It was a part of my history, a part of my story, but it wasn't my present. It was an artifact, and I was its custodian. Nothing more. I walked back out onto my porch, my sanctuary. The evening air was cool, smelling of cut grass and the distant promise of rain. I sat on my swing, and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery, triumphant gold. I was free. I was at peace. A quiet, hard-won, unbreakable peace. And in my house, the one I had built, and the one I had saved, I was finally home. And so Clementine's house was no longer just a sanctuary, but a fortress built on a new foundation of her own strength. What did you think of her decision to fight back? Let us know your thoughts below. We read every single comment. If you love stories of resilience and justice, be sure to subscribe for more. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.